The world has seen wars, and different nations of the world have built weapons of different types to protect themselves from enemy nations. From ballistic missiles to fighter jets, atomic bombs and submarines. But have you ever heard of the largest gun ever built by man? The story of the Schwerer Gustav is truly one in a kind. Everything about this specially made gigantic gun is astonishing, and in this video we've detailed every single thing about this supergun just for you. You wouldn't want to miss this one, so keep up. Hi there, and welcome back yet again to your #1 history channel, where we bring you interesting facts about the greatest events and personalities in history. If you love content about historical facts, you definitely want to stick around. Make sure to like this video and hit the subscribe button and smash the notification bell to receive notifications of when we post more interesting videos like this one. Now, let's get back to the story of the Schwerer Gustav. Enormous siege guns are nothing new to war. They've been employed in some form or the other since the late Middle Ages. The Schwerer Gustav was the most notable siege gun of the Germans. It was a railway gun that was developed by the Nazis in preparation for World War II. Schwerer Gustav was conceived prior to the beginning of World War II, when Hitler demanded its construction as a precursor to the invasion of France. It was to aid the German army in penetrating the Maginot Line. In the 1930s, France constructed the Maginot Line, which was a series of fortifications and obstacles intended to protect the country against invasion from the east, essentially Germany. The Maginot Line was to serve as an impenetrable wall of defense and ran from the Rhine River to Le Fert, made of concrete blockhouses, bunkers and rail lines. After studying details of the Maginot Line fortifications that were published in French newspapers, it became apparent to the German Wehrmacht, that's the Combined Armed Forces planners, that they did not possess any weapon capable of penetrating the fortifications. So in March 1936, Adolf Hitler visited the Krupp factory and asked Gustav Krupp, head of the Krupp organization, what type of weapon was needed to smash through the Maginot Line. Krupp explained that a 35.5-inch railway gun could be constructed and would be able to defeat the Maginot Line. After Hitler's visit, Krupp directed his design staff to begin the layout of such a weapon. In early 1937, Krupp met with Hitler and presented him with the design for the 33.5-inch railway gun. Hitler approved of what he saw, and the German Army High Command commissioned Krupp to build 3 guns under the designation 80cm cannon. The guns would quickly come to be known as the Schwerer Gustav, named after Gustav Krupp. Hitler wanted the first gun to be ready by March 1940. Its construction missed the invasion of France, but it did take part in some actions throughout the war, as well as in the siege of Sebastopol on the Eastern Front, where it was extensively used. The Schwerer Gustav was an absolutely huge weapon. It was 47.3 meters long, 7.1 meters wide, and 11.6 meters tall. The barrel, cradle, and breech weighed 400 tons. The barrel was over 100 feet long, longer than any gun barrel in existence, and the body of the gun was bigger than any tank to see battle so far. The Schwerer Gustav was more like a small building than a gun. From the ground up, it was almost 4 stories tall, was over 150 feet long including the barrel, and weighed over 1,300 tons. The shells alone, which had been designed with pure destruction in mind, were taller than 2 men, twice as wide as 1 man, and weighed a staggering 20,000 pounds each. It took several men just to load 1 shell into the barrel. For the gun to move around, the body was built on 2 parallel sets of rail wheels, allowing it to travel across special tracks. Ultimately, the High Command ordered 2 of these weapons, the Schwerer Gustav and a smaller model they called Dora. Hitler and the Germans were ultimately forced to invade France without the Schwerer Gustav following its delayed completion, and even after the French surrendered quickly, Hitler still wanted to make use of his magnificent and destructive weapon. The siege of Sebastopol proved the perfect opportunity to display its grandeur before his enemies. The heavy artillery unit E672 was sent to Crimea along with the railway gun, and in early March, the train reached the Isthmus of Perekop, where it waited until April while the special railway for the gun was built. In April, the Schwerer Gustav was placed on the new tracks going from Simferopol to Sebastopol. Finally, after 5 weeks of positioning the device, a feat that required 4,000 men to complete, the weapon was ready. The mighty weapon had 2 different fire options, a concrete piercing shell and a high explosive shell lighter than the first one. It began shooting on June 5th with 500 soldiers participating in the firing process and marking its first time in combat. In 6 days, spanning between June 5th and June 11th, the Schwerer Gustav fired 48 rounds, equaling 30,000 tons of ammunition. The barrel of the gun, which had already fired 250 rounds during testing, was worn out entirely, as were the men. It took 500 of them just to fire the gun, and after loading the oversized shells into the machine, they were spent. By the time Sebastopol fell on July 4th, the city had been completely destroyed by the sheer firing power of the heavy weapon. It shot at several valuable targets, including a munitions depot 98 feet underground, which collapsed due to the shot. After the battle, the Schwerer Gustav was taken apart, with the barrel sent back to Krups to be relined, while a spare was affixed to the machine to prepare for an attack on Leningrad. But after that was cancelled, the Schwerer Gustav was moved to a set of tracks near Leningrad. But after using the Schwerer Gustav railway gun just once, the Germans realised the impracticality of it. First, the sheer number of men needed to fire just one round of ammunition was insane. During battle, it was hard to spare that many men just for one task. Also, it took entire troops multiple days just to move the giant railway gun, a near impossible feat if one wanted to perform it covertly. The train that moved the gun had 25 cars, which did not include crews or supplies and was almost a mile long. Due to its huge size, the Schwerer Gustav was impossible to hide from planes and was clearly visible from almost any higher elevation. The overall operation and deployment of the gun simply required too many hands on a deck situation that was rightly deemed as inefficient use of time and manpower. The Schwerer Gustav only moved on specially designed tracks, also making it highly limited by terrain. On top of that, the tracks had to be laid in advance, making it incredibly easy for the Axis powers to predict the troops' movements. In addition to needing parallel tracks, the Schwerer Gustav required its tracks to be curved up to 15 degrees. The gun had no built-in ability to traverse, so horizontal aiming was accomplished by moving the entire gun along the curved track. Extra bracing was added to the inside rail of both tracks along the shooting curve. This bracing helped prevent the tracks from being damaged due to the gun's recoil. Similarly, maintenance and the cost of shells were likewise expensive and hard to justify when there were smaller, more covert tanks readily available. Another major issue with Schwerer Gustav was the rate of fire. Since calibrating the cannon required several hours, it could only shoot about 14 rounds a day. By April 14, 1945, the Soviet Union's Vienna offensive had been largely successful, and it was evidence that American troops would soon be taking over the country. The same day, the leadership in charge of the Schwerer Gustav decided to dismantle the cannon to prevent the Allied forces from capturing and using it. The weapon's ruins were found on April 22nd in a forest near Urbach and Chemnitz. After being studied by Soviet weapons specialists, it was sent to Merseburg and subsequently lost. Dora was destroyed on April 19th and the wreckage was discovered by American troops. Today, parts of those ruins are housed in the Dresden Military History Museum of the Bundeswehr. The cost of the Schwerer Gustav has to be estimated at 10 million Reichsmark, which by today's valuation would be a whopping $25 million. This is aside from other associated costs like the cost of constructing the special rails and other maintenance costs. Dora cost 7 million Reichsmark to manufacture, with that translating to $17.4 million presently. The Schwerer Gustav was one of the most promising and largest projects in military history. It failed to live up to expectations and was only used one time in a real battle.